Well, if you're looking to sign up for the Westgate Super Contest, this weekend is Super Contest weekend out there. We got a golf outing, got some seminars, all kinds of different stuff going on there at the Westgate. Also, you've got the Circa Million downtown at Derek Stevens' two books, the D and Golden Gate. You've got the Golden Nugget Ultimate Football Challenge and the William Hill Pick'em out there in Las Vegas. If you don't live in the state of Nevada, you need a proxy. Vegas Maddie and Tony over at footballcontest.com do a phenomenal job with that. They've been our proxies for the last several years. We'll be going with them again this year for our Super Contest, Circa Million, and Golden Nugget entries. So check them out over at footballcontest.com. Once again, you can sign up no matter where you live, but if you don't live in the state of Nevada, you'll have to have a proxy. Vegas, Maddie, and Tony over at footballcontest.com will be exactly that for you. We got one more guest here for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number one on Twitter, who you can also hear on VSiN these days. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam, good morning, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, buddy. How's everything going for you?
Going all right, man. Just getting ready to get into this football season here. It's finally upon us.
Yes, sir, it definitely is, and we'll get to that here in a couple of minutes, but I want to start on the golf side of the ledger with the Tour Championship. Justin Thomas, plus 240 favorite. He's already 10 under before this tournament even starts. Brooks Koepka, plus 450. I believe he's 7 under. Patrick Cantlay, plus 460 at 8 under. Rory at 7-1, and then on down 14-1 plus from there. At Eastlake Golf Club, because of this new format where, based on where you are in the FedEx Cup standings, you get extra strokes under par. So what has that done for you in terms of handicapping this event?
Yeah, you really want to kind of look at unique markets. I mean, most of the futures markets really in the casinos out here and in the racing sports books out here in Nevada are doing it based on the actual stroke advantage, as you were speaking of. So basically you're betting almost really to essentially to win the FedEx Cup and not necessarily the event. I know some offshore books may offer the actual low strokes for the actual tournament play, as it would be for a traditional tournament. But with the futures market, you pretty much, I mean, you really can't take bombs in terms of to win the FedEx Cup because, I mean, if you've got guys in the 25 to 30 range, I mean, they're starting at even par. So they're already starting at a 10-shot deficit. I mean, theoretically, they could be like 19 under for this tournament. And if Thomas, the leader, shoots 10 under, he wins. I mean, so you've got to be able, I think, to decide which market you want to do. Like if I'm going in the traditional market and maybe trying to fade the favorite a little bit, I can't really go that far down the board like I would like to. So you mentioned Rory McIlroy at 7-1. I think John Rahm is in the very low teens. Those were a couple players I was looking at to win the event this week, and essentially the FedEx Cup. What was interesting was seeing the matchups. I know Jeff Sherman over at the Westgate, he posted matchups with players matched up against each other that had essentially the same stroke. So guys that are 3 under par to start the tournament are matched up with another guy that's 3 under par. You're not having necessarily Justin Thomas matched up against Louis Oosthuizen. Some of the matchups, if you look up on the Don Best screen or whatever screen you might use to compare and contrast odds, I think I saw something like Justin Thomas against Patrick Reed, and earlier this week, price may have come down a little bit now, but Justin Thomas was like a $5 favorite. Well, essentially, he's got a 4-stroke lead to start the tournament, so that's why you're seeing, I think, these matchup prices really so high that you would not ordinarily see.
Well, speaking of the offshores here, I'm looking at one of them that does have Tour Championship odds with no handicap included. Rory's the 8-1 favorite, Thomas at 9-1, Koepka 10, Cantlay 12, DJ and Webb Simpson 14, Matsuyama 16. Matsuyama's 4 days last weekend were quite an adventure as he putted well 2 days, putted awful the other 2 days, so he was a pretty interesting guy there. But I want to focus a little bit more on the matchup thing, and I talked about this on yesterday's show with Brian Blessing. when you were looking at Justin Thomas with a big lead last week in the BMW, there were good opportunities to fade him on Sunday because he didn't have to play aggressively. He could just hit middle of greens, 2-putt, get out with par, and he was good to go. And he still almost gave up that lead to Patrick Cantlay. I feel like there will be opportunities like that this week with guys trying to hold top 10 positions for the $1 million payouts, trying to just sort of be a little bit more aggressive and move up the board. I think this is a great format for matchup betting.
Yeah, I think so too, especially more round by round necessarily than the full tournament matchups. And you mentioned Matsuyama. That was a guy that I did have last week. And the fact that, the putting, we know the issue with him, and it really comes and goes. I think the Friday round, I believe, he had like 5.2 or 5.3 strokes gained putting, which was the best of his career, after being -2 strokes gained putting on Thursday, and then he was -1.7 on Saturday's round, and then in round 4 he was plus like 2.25 or something. So he did. Adventure was the right choice of words there by you to put it mildly, but yeah, I think that's what you want to do here is look at kind of maybe some more of the round by round, because I think people saw these prices and maybe weren't sure of the format, and that's why you've seen such big droppers. I believe I saw offshore Thomas open -450 over Patrick Reed, to the buyback being +420, and now at a couple places you're seeing kind of the low to mid 300s with like a +265 on the take back. So that might be guys just taking prices that aren't really sure of the format. So I definitely think the round by round is the way you really want to go. And I usually like to do full tournament matchups, but this format has kind of changed my approach for that.
I guess last thing I'll ask about with regards to this tournament then, this is a long par 70. So this is a place where it's going to be hard to post some numbers because you don't have the par 5s. You can go out there and get your eagle shots and stuff like that with this being a lower par course. So in terms of matchups, taking the handicap out of it and the 10 under, 8 under, all that type of thing, this is the top 30 in golf for this year, at least in terms of the FedEx Cup point standings. Not all of these guys are top 30 players by any means. They've just played a lot of tournaments and have had chances to accumulate points, maybe have won a tournament here or there. But as far as this course and the setup of it, Wes, which players do you think it's a real strength for?
Well, I think what you're looking at, and this is a Donald Ross design, it is a par 70, about a little over 7,300 yards and change with only 2 par 5s. So it's a little bit more of a technical course. I don't expect we're going to see what we saw out of Medina with 25 under par winning this event, because if you look at the recent winners, 11 under, 12 under, 12 under, 9 under, 11 under, 13. That's kind of in the range I think that you're going to be looking for here. And I guess in certain statistics that I would look at, you want guys that have good greens and regulation. You want guys that can gain strokes around the green, scrambling like with their pitches and with their chip shots. So really, it sounds like such a cliche because a lot of these courses kind of fit this description, but it really is, I think, a second shot golf course. So you're looking at guys that can really hit those longer irons very well, and the guys that have kind of done that all year, if you really monitor the statistics, the strokes gained approach the green, the greens in regulation. So that brings Rory into play. That brings Matsuyama into play. Of course, Justin Thomas is up near high on that list, and he's justifiably the leader in this event. So those were kind of the indicators I was looking for this week.
All right, we transition to a much different game played on a green field here, and that's the NFL, and it's dress rehearsal week. As we all know, week 3 of the preseason, typically the one that looks most like a regular season game. Starters play into the second half in most instances. So is this more of a truer handicap for you, Wes, or are you still maybe looking at derivatives first and foremost? How do you approach week 3 of the preseason?
Yeah, I'm definitely – you still got to look a little bit at the derivative market. In terms of the moves in preseason, when we see these line moves, a lot of this, keep in mind, is the fact that they're taking lower limits, so the lines are going to move faster. You're getting mostly sharper guys kind of taking numbers. And like what we saw last week, if you faded the steam kind of at the apex, you were able to get a few winners in your pocket. If you look at, like, Dallas got set up to a 4.5-point favorite because we knew that the Rams were leaving virtually half the roster back in Los Angeles and not making the flight to Hawaii. But if you took the Rams at the end, you were able to get a winner, and you kind of saw that a little bit with Pittsburgh as well, and some of these games that came into play. So I've been doing a little bit more second halves because, I mean, the way that you handicap the preseason when you've got the backups is you want to look for those quarterbacks that I think are more running quarterbacks that can bust some runs, get some busted plays, because, look, these quarterbacks, the second, third units, they're playing behind second, third, and fourth unit offensive line, and they're going against second, third, and fourth unit defensive guys. So you're going to get a lot more scrambles and a lot more long runs, and I mean that's what I've seen in the preseason so far. So in terms of this, I mean, certain teams are going to approach this week a little bit differently. Certain teams are going to play the first unit maybe the entire first quarter, or maybe the entire first half. Some of them might go a little bit into the third quarter. So I think it's a little bit of a truer handicap, but I think, look, you're not going to fool these odds makers. I mean, they're going to pump the teams that are the favorites in the full game market. They're going to pump them a little bit more even in the first half market. So, and the first halves aren't even going to come out really until game day because I think they know these guys are looking for that, and they would hammer these. So, like you look at something like Carolina and New England. Well, assuming that Brady is going to play at least a couple series and at least maybe into the second quarter, you would see that first half almost mirror, more than likely, or come close to mirroring the full game for the Patriots line, and we saw that open 3, now about 3.5. It's been holding pretty steady. My lean would actually be with Carolina in that spot because if you look at New England, they got faded the first 2 weeks. At Detroit and also at Tennessee, and they went against the money and got the win both times. So now you're seeing it kind of move where it's like, well, these guys got the win and got faded both times, and now they're going to start their first stringers. So New England's got to be the auto play, right? And that, I mean, maybe the first half, but I would say like full game, this line may go up as kind of maybe the piggybackers kind of look at the line move and follow it, and then you can maybe get something on Carolina if this goes to 4, 4.5, or even 5, and then that would make them, I think, a much more attractive play.
You know, I think it's really interesting here this preseason, and really last preseason too, is kind of when we really started to see this, because if you had some 0-2 teams going into week 3, and we have several, Colts, Jaguars, Chargers, Redskins, Bears, Lions, and Rams. The Falcons are actually 0-3 here in the preseason. It used to be in week 3 you would auto-play those 0-2 teams because they want to get a win. You know, they're going to play their starters more. They want to get a win. They don't want to go over in the preseason. But I think now, maybe more than ever, we've got a lot of teams where the head coaches just don't really care about the preseason.
Yeah, I think we've got it defined. I mean, the way I look at it, you can find the preseason trends, and we talk about the preseason coach ATS marks on the VSiN programming all the time, and it's kind of one of those deals where it's like, if you know it as a player, they know it as an odds maker, and it's almost even the reverse. If they know it, more than likely you know it because there's more information out there before, and we know that some coaches really care about the preseason, and even though the premiums are already in the line, they've been covering, especially a team like Baltimore. We know that John Harbaugh really gears up for the preseason. We know that John Gruden has historically a good preseason mark. We know that Pete Carroll historically has a good preseason mark. And then you go to the other side, Dan Quinn in Atlanta, Sean McVay for the L.A. Rams, albeit that's a little bit of a shorter sample size. even Jason Garrett with the Cowboys. Those aren't guys that really have good preseason marks. And with the trend, you got to be a little careful because, look, Frank Reich with the Colts went 4-0 in the preseason last year, 0-2 so far. So sometimes these things even out, and then sometimes kind of the trend is your friend if you've got a longer sample size and a lot more data to look at.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you here. We'll finish up talking about the preseason and then talk a little bit of college football to end the segment in the show here. Indianapolis steamed in week 1, steamed in week 2, lost them both, steamed in week 3, up from -3 to -4 here. Is this the week that the Colts actually play well, or is this just a different mindset, especially in light of the Andrew Luck situation?
Well, and I mean, the fact that they're playing the Bears, and I laid off the Colts last week, played them second half, and they just barely got there, but didn't cover the game. I covered the second half. They're playing the Bears, another team that, granted, it's only the second season, and you got a shorter sample size, but Matt Nagy is a guy that really does not show much in the preseason. And he didn't show like anything last year and not really doing so much this year. They've got a kicking battle going on in Chicago. So that creates another thing that's a little bit uncertain if you're looking at the Bears here. So I think that's why you're seeing the Colts take a little bit of money here. I mean, we know Andrew hasn't practiced, so likely certainly he's not going to play. So that's why I think you're seeing the Colts move here. Just not even really a backing of the Colts, maybe more of a fading of Matt Nagy and the Bears in this situation.
All right, so we'll transition over to the college football side here. 2 meaningful games on Saturday, Florida, Miami, Arizona, Hawaii. 6 next Thursday as far as FBS versus FBS goes. So it's about crunch time here in the college football world. And Wes, it's been a busy time for you getting in there with VSiN. Obviously a career change there with that. Still trying to keep up with your own handicapping. You moved out to Vegas last year, and you've certainly had the summer to get situated and all that. But how far advanced are you with your college football preparations, and what are you doing to get to a point where you feel comfortable?
Yeah, I've done a few season wins, and we'll probably add a few more kind of in the midst of some of the writing I've been doing for our publications and then the on-air stuff. But really, I mean, week 1 to me has almost, I know we have that week 0 or whatever the heck we want to call the 2 games this weekend, but it really, I think week 1 has gotten a little bit harder, to be honest with you, to find, I guess, some edges or maybe if you see any numbers off, because these games have been up for so long. These games have been up for well over a month. I mean, it used to be, and you remember this, Adam, week 1 college football, first week of September, they might get them up in the second week of August. I mean, so then when they started several years ago, some of these shops doing these games of the year, they decided to put them up earlier. And I think that's a little bit of an edge for the bookmakers because they're willing to take maybe the sharp guys that are going to bet into these early numbers to maybe put their numbers back that they see as maybe out of whack, kind of put them back in proper range, and then the recreational and then the masses kind of come the week of the games or the day of the games and can bet into the market. But yeah, week 1, it used to be like almost the biggest edge for the players because the odds makers were as unsure of the numbers as you are as bettors and players. But I tend to now like weeks 2 through 5 a little bit more because then we have a game pretty much for every team to go on. So you can really, I think, exploit the overreaction in the marketplace, and then on kind of the basis of what you see, and then you get that week of media hype when somebody looks like a world beater in week 1, but then when you did your preseason evaluation, it's like, well, I really didn't evaluate them as that good. So that's kind of the way I approach college football now.
Well, and that's an excellent point. And I mentioned this over the summer when we were talking about season win totals and look-ahead lines and all that. Even if you're not prepared to bet them, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners weren't, and maybe didn't even have access because a lot of them at the brick and mortars, but it gives you an idea of where to put these teams, of where the odds makers are rating them. And I agree with you that you throw these things out there as an operator in early June with low limits, and you get an idea of where the sharp markets where the sharp players have these teams rated. So this is a very tough week to bet into, because you would think with the uncertainty and the variance from team to team that this would be a very inefficient week for betting, but it's actually more efficient than you would think, because a lot of sharp players have already extracted the value they believe to be out there. That's not to say that these lines won't move next week, but simply to say that, the people that dictate what happens in the market have, to a degree, had their say already. So these numbers are probably pretty good, even though we could see some results that, obviously don't fall close to the number.
Yeah, and I was talking about this with Jimmy Vaccaro at the South Point a few weeks ago, and I asked him, has this made it easier for you guys to put these numbers out a little bit earlier? And he said absolutely, because, then you get an idea of what your sharper players or your sharper accounts might be playing early on in the season that maybe aren't knee-deep into baseball, or maybe just kind of casually betting baseball, but football is really their points of emphasis in terms of their betting and handicapping. So that gives them an idea a little bit of what they're doing. And they can look at the slate, and these guys are smart enough and can see that, which of these teams are going to get bet, that the premium teams are kind of going to get bet with regardless of the number. There are going to be people that are going to lay Alabama. There are going to be people that are going to play the more highly ranked teams, the Georgias and what have you. So that's kind of what I think that they're looking at here. So week one for me has gotten a lot tougher. I remember the old days when you would have the tout shows or the service advisory shows on Saturday morning, and the guys, as part of the pitch, would be saying something that was true, but they'd be saying, hey, the odds makers are just as unsure of their numbers. And yes, that's true, but I think putting these out earlier have given them a little bit more confidence.
Now, we will reconvene next Wednesday, so we'll be able to talk about this a little bit more after these things happen. But to finish up this segment here, Wes, I want to ask you about this. These lines have been out since early June, and some value has been extracted. More value will be extracted next week as limits get bigger on game week. Then as we get closer to the game, limits continue to get bigger. When do you expect to see some waves of movement out there for these week one numbers?
I think probably maybe even starting this weekend a little bit, as you get some more people that come into town, because, of course, you mentioned leading into the segment that you've got the Circa Million, this is a super contest weekend where they have the golf outing and all the events tied with that. So then you'll have some of the out-of-towners that come here regularly year after year that'll probably start taking some of these games over the weekend. You've already seen a little bit of movement. Now, I don't think it's maybe a ton of money, but you've already seen some 3 and 4 point moves, I think, really in the total. And you're going to see that no matter what, because the limits are lower. But I think you'll probably see some more side movements probably starting this weekend and then into early next week.
I guess, actually, I thought of one more thing here, because, you have always been a higher volume guy. And obviously, I think with some more commitment since you've moved out there, you've shied away from posting all that stuff on Twitter. I can't blame you for that. I imagine you're probably a little bit lower volume than you used to be. But in terms of the week 0 and week 1 derivative markets, and again, maybe we can revisit this next week after some line moves, do you feel less comfortable playing those here early on in the season just because we're not fully sure what we're going to get from a lot of these teams?
Maybe a little bit. I think I'll experiment a little bit with some live wagering just to kind of see what's going on. But, like you were saying earlier, some of these numbers based on the results certainly are going to say, oh, well, those numbers were way off. So there's going to be a couple things when we look at these numbers that are not going to be as close to the number, where it's going to be like, okay, somebody was a 4-point favorite and they end up winning by 25. So it's like, okay, well, that number was bad, and you automatically assume that even though it might not necessarily be the case. But, yeah, I try to maybe do some more first halves and I'll probably be doing a little bit more second halves than I guess your traditional pre-flop plays. I mean, I'll have a few. I mean, look, we got pretty much every in action. So even though I try to reduce the volume from what I used to play, I'll still have a few. I mean, having 7 or 8 bets on a big card like this is not really that much. Now, when you're having 30 or 40, yeah, that's probably a little bit too much.
Wes Reynolds is working and find on Twitter at Wes Reynolds, the number 1, also contributor to VSiN On Air and also the Point Spread Weekly publication you guys do. Wes, great to get you back on the program here. Thank you so much for joining me, buddy, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Good to be back with you, Adam. Thanks for having me.